At my son's rehearsal dinner, my sister raised her wine toward the most powerful man in the room, tilted her head the way she does when she's about to sell something, and called me the sister who never quite figured out a career. Somebody's spoon stopped in midair. A table full of people I'd never met turned to study my face like I was an exhibit. I smiled. I had rehearsed that smile in my bathroom mirror the night before, just in case. Then the man beside her went very still, set his glass down without a sound, and I watched my sister's confidence flicker like a bulb about to die. None of them knew that the man she was trying so hard to impress had spent 3 years quietly looking for me. Welcome to Quiet Table Stories, the channel for the women who get talked over at family dinners, underestimated at weddings, and written off by people who never once asked what their silence actually cost. Stick around, because by the end of this one, the wrong person is going to find out exactly who they were talking to. Type the city you're watching from down in the comments, and if you haven't yet, hit subscribe. We've got a lot more of these. My name is Diane Ashworth. I'm 47. And for most of that rehearsal dinner, I stood near the bar with a glass of wine I never got around to drinking. I've become an expert at standing near the edges of rooms. 3 years ago, I wouldn't have known how to find the edge of a room, because I was always the reason the room existed in the first place. Head of the table. First name on the agenda. I used to run turnaround strategy for companies you'd recognize from the news, and I built that career without a single favor. No family money, no lucky marriage, no soft landing. People used to call me a force. Now I was the aunt nobody could quite place, standing by the coat rack, watching my son Caleb laugh with the woman he was about to marry. And strangely, I felt calm, because I had already survived losing the exact thing I once thought would break me, and here I still was. Caleb has my mother's laugh. Nobody in that restaurant knew that, or that I'd sat beside a hospital bed for 2 years while my old life quietly emptied out behind me. To them, I was just Renata's older sister, the one who didn't seem to be doing much of anything. They were polite to me the way people are polite to a stray cat. I let them believe it. Being underestimated, I'd learned, is its own strange kind of privacy. But it's a loan, not a gift. Eventually, somebody comes to collect the interest. The call came on a Tuesday, a little over 3 years before that rehearsal dinner, and I remember exactly where I was standing, a glass-walled conference room on the 40th floor, 3 days away from being named a full partner at my firm. 20 years of climbing had brought me right up to that door, and it was finally opening. I stepped into the hallway to take the call, mildly annoyed at the interruption. My mother said the word pancreatic, then she said stage 4, and the city below the window went very quiet in my head. She was 69. The oncologist gave her a small number. I did the only math that ever mattered to me in that hallway. Keep the door or keep the time. I didn't agonize the way people assume. I walked back into that glass room, withdrew my name from partnership, and watched 20 years of ambition rearrange itself into something smaller and truer. My sister Renata was living 2 states away. I called her that night. She said something quick and offhand that I didn't understand for 3 full years, and when I finally did, I understood everything about her. That comes later, at a table with white orchids and a man setting down his glass. Here's what people always get backward about my sister and me. We were both asked to step up. On a family call full of too many voices talking over each other, someone finally said the quiet part. One of us needed to put a career on hold. Renata was a junior manager then, terrified of losing her footing at a firm she didn't fully trust would keep her. When the question landed, she said fast, like she'd rehearsed it, "I can't just throw away everything I've built." The uncomfortable truth is, I understood her completely. I know exactly what it costs to throw away what you've built, because I did it. She wasn't a villain. She was a woman who'd climbed a slippery ladder for years and couldn't picture letting go of a single rung. So I volunteered, the way you take the job nobody else wants. Half love, half pride. Not yet knowing the world keeps two separate ledgers. One for the people who stay, one for the people who leave. I didn't resent her for it then. The resentment came later, and it never came from the caregiving itself. It came from what she decided that caregiving meant about me. 2 years is a long stretch when you're counting it in prescription refills. I learned oncology terminology the same way I once learned mergers and acquisitions. Fluently and against my will. I sold my condo and moved somewhere smaller so the money would stretch further. I drove her to 6 a.m. infusions and learned which nurses were kind and which were simply efficient. My phone, which used to buzz constantly with people needing my judgment, went quiet. Then it went dark completely. I didn't have the bandwidth to grieve that loss on top of everything else happening. Some nights, my mother would surface out of the fog the medication put her in, sharp and lucid. One of those nights, she gripped my hand and said something I've carried like a smooth stone in my pocket ever since. They will always measure you by the room you're standing in. Don't you ever measure yourself the same way. I told her she was being theatrical. She told me she was dying and had earned the right to be. We both laughed, a real laugh, not a rehearsed one. That was the last good week we had. There's a small mercy in never knowing which week is the last one until it's already behind you. My mother passed in early spring, and something strange happened at the funeral. People started talking about me in the past tense, not her, me. A great aunt squeezed my arm and murmured what a shame it was, how impressive I'd once been. Renata flew in for 2 days, dressed beautifully, cried in a way that drew comfort from everyone nearby, and by the reception she'd become the grieving daughter while I'd quietly become the tired woman who'd been handling things. She told a cousin she hoped I could find my footing again soon, as if I'd wandered off a trail rather than carried our mother the whole length of hers. I stood in my mother's kitchen holding a casserole dish some neighbor had dropped off, and felt 2 years of my life being rewritten by people who hadn't been in the room for any of it. Nobody warns you. You sacrifice the visible version of your life, and the people with visible lives get to decide what your invisible one was worth. In Renata's version, I wasn't the one who'd sacrificed. I was the cautionary tale. A year later, Caleb called with the best news I'd had in ages. He was marrying Priya, and she was steady and warm and clearly good for him. Something in my chest ached in a way that had nothing to do with grief, for once. But near the end of the call, he got quiet, then said the sentence that told me exactly where I stood in this family now. Mom, Aunt Renata's going to be there and she's got her whole thing about you being between jobs. Could you just not engage with it? For me, it's one day. He was 25 and terrified of a scene at his own wedding, and I could hear love and shame in the same breath. I told him, of course, honey, and I meant it, though in that one small sentence, my own son had just told me which sister needed managing, not the one doing the mocking, the one who might mind being mocked. Later, I asked him gently where it was he worked. He said it like it was nothing, Northbridge Consulting. Aunt Renata had actually helped him land the interview, he added. She was a manager there. What I didn't tell him was what that name meant to me. I'd gone head-to-head with Northbridge for a decade, and years earlier I'd built a diagnostic framework, a way of mapping what a company actually does against what it claims to value, that traveled through the industry the way good ideas do, uncredited, everywhere. Northbridge had absorbed a version of it wholesale. By now it would just be furniture there, a tool so ordinary nobody remembers whose hands built it. My own son was working inside a house I used to lay siege to, under a sister who'd built her climb standing on top of something with my fingerprints all over it, and none of them had any idea, because none of them had ever asked me a real question about who I used to be. I could have told him that night. I chose not to. I was just tired of being the woman who has to explain she used to matter. I was going to my son's wedding to watch him be happy, and I didn't owe anybody my resume. Priya's family had quiet, understated money, and the rehearsal dinner was in a private room where staff refolded your napkin the moment you stepped away. I wore the one good dress I'd kept from my old life and felt like a relic of myself. Renata walked in like she'd personally reserved the room. New watch, new confidence worn like perfume. Within 10 minutes, she had a crowd gathered by the window, telling stories that all ended with her being proven right. I watched my son watch her with something like envy, and understood the shape of the evening before it played out. Tonight she was the family's success story, and every success story needs a contrast standing nearby. I took a chair near the edge, which by now felt less like exile and more like good visibility. From the edge, you see who a person really is when they think only the important people are watching. Renata kept glancing at the door all night, waiting for someone who outranked the rest of us. That someone didn't show, but he came up in nearly every sentence. My CEO, she kept saying. Julian is brutally selective. She told a long story about a pitch deck she'd rebuilt overnight after he rejected the first draft. She said his name, Julian Reyes, the way some people say the name of someone whose approval they've spent years chasing, dropping it in front of Priya's father and my beaming son, glancing my way each time to make sure I registered the gap between a woman who reported to Julian Reyes and a woman who reported to no one. I sipped my wine and said nothing. The name meant nothing to me. I'd left the industry before Reyes rose to the top. Renata didn't know that either. She just knew I used to be somebody and wanted whatever was left of the somebody in me to witness how far she'd climbed. It was Priya's mother who asked kindly over the salad course. And what do you do, Diane? A simple, human question. I opened my mouth to answer honestly, that I'd stepped back from consulting to care for my mother and was figuring out my next chapter, which is the truth and nothing to be ashamed of. Renata answered before I got a single word out, a light little laugh and, "Oh, Diane's between things right now. Has been for a while," said fondly. That was the cruelty of it, wrapped in warmth, so that anyone who winced would look unkind for wincing. Priya's mother smiled uncertainly and moved the conversation forward, and I sat there, introduced to my son's new family as a woman defined entirely by absence, as though the 2 years I'd spent holding a dying woman's hand were a blank space in a timeline instead of the fullest thing I'd ever done. Something in me, the part that used to sit calmly across from hostile boardrooms, went cold and still. That's one way to describe it, I said, and let it drop, because it was Caleb's weekend, and I'd made a promise. But I filed it away. Some sentences you file. Later, over dessert, Priya's father mentioned he might need consulting help for his own company down the line. Nothing serious, just thinking aloud. Renata moved like she'd smelled blood in the water, pulled her cards from her bag, Northbridge Consulting embossed in navy, and fanned them across the tablecloth like a winning poker hand, sliding them toward him. Then she turned to me and asked, "Do you have one to give them, Diane? Anything at all?" The table went quiet in that specific way. Everyone understood the real question wasn't about business cards. It was whether I still existed. I didn't have one. My old cards were 3 years deep in a drawer, and I hadn't made new ones because I didn't yet know what they'd say. I sat empty-handed in front of my son and his new family, while my sister's Navy cards lay fanned across the linen like proof of who was real. I smiled. Nope. Fresh out. Renata smiled back, satisfied, and the moment passed for everyone except me. If you've ever sat empty-handed while someone spread their accomplishments across a table like a winning hand, you know exactly what that silence sounds like. Tell me in the comments if you've been there too. Stay with me. This turns hard from here. That night, back in my apartment, I pulled down a box I hadn't touched in years. Not paperwork, just a photograph. My mother and me at an industry conference, 15 years back, laughing at something outside the frame. She'd flown in just to sit in the back row and watch me give a keynote she didn't understand a word of. She used to do that, sit in rooms where her daughter was the expert and just beam. I sat on the floor and finally asked myself the question I'd been outrunning for 3 years. If I don't produce anything anyone can measure, am I still something? An ugly question, because it means part of you has started believing the world's arithmetic, that a woman without a title is a woman without worth. I didn't cry. I just let the question be honest, because you can't fix a rot you refuse to name. My mother's voice came back. Don't you dare measure yourself the same way. I slid the photograph into my purse. I just wanted her at the wedding with me. The morning of the wedding, Caleb needed help with his tie, the way he always has. I tied it the way my own father once taught me and looked at my boy in the mirror. He apologized again for the phone call. I told him it was fine, that I wasn't going to be a single ounce of trouble that day, and meant it as a gift, not a sacrifice. He hugged me too hard, the way he did as a kid during thunderstorms. The ceremony was short and lovely. Then came the reception, long tables under string lights, and I was seated well back with a great aunt and two of Priya's college friends. From back there I watched my sister orbit one man all evening, mid-50s, calm the way genuinely powerful people are calm, taking exactly the space he needed and no more. Julian Reyes. I recognized the choreography even without recognizing the face, because I used to be the person rooms arranged themselves around. Then Renata spotted me and started walking my way, Julian in tow. I knew what was coming the way you know weather. I set my glass down and straightened my spine, an old reflex from a life these people never believed I'd had. Renata arrived glowing, gestured toward me like she was unveiling something, and turned to Julian to make her introduction. Julian, this is my sister, the one I told you about, Diane, the unemployed one. Lives off the family, bless her heart. Been between things for years. She said it to a CEO at her own nephew's wedding, smiling like it was affection. The great aunt beside me inhaled sharply, and I did the thing I'd trained myself to do after 3 years of being narrated by people who'd never once been in the actual room. I laughed, gently, not bitterly. Then I looked at this stranger and said the truest, quietest thing I had left. She's right. I don't have a title anymore. I meant it as surrender in that first half second. I meant, you win. But some sentences change shape the instant they leave your mouth, because as soon as I said it, it stopped sounding like an apology, as if a title had ever been the thing that made me anything at all. Across the table, Julian went very still and set his drink down slowly and looked at me the way nobody had looked at me in 3 years, like I was worth focusing on. I'm sorry, he said, ignoring my sister entirely. I don't believe we've met properly. What did you say your name was? Diane, I said. Renata jumped in. Renata cannot bear a silence she doesn't control. Ashworth. She's an Ashworth too, obviously. Another laugh, trying to drag the moment back onto rails she owned. Julian didn't look away from my face. Diane Ashworth, he repeated slowly, and something surfaced behind his eyes, some old file being pulled off a shelf. Not the Diane Ashworth, not the one who built the decision mapping framework? The great aunt looked baffled. Renata's smile developed a hairline crack, because those were not words she had ever expected to hear attached to the sister she'd spent years shrinking down. My pulse was suddenly loud in my own ears. I wrote an early version of it, I said carefully. A long time ago. Julian let out a short, surprised breath, almost a laugh, and shook his head. A long time ago. My entire analytics division still runs on your long time ago. The table had gone completely silent. He explained plainly that Northbridge had adopted my framework firm-wide years back, that it was the literal backbone of how they made decisions now, and that 3 years ago, the moment he'd taken over as CEO, the very first outside hire he'd wanted to make was the woman who built it. Every recruiting cycle for 3 years, I had my team put your name back at the top of the list. You'd gone completely off the map. No firm, no board seats. I assumed some competitor had buried you under an NDA. I couldn't understand how someone that good just vanishes. My mother got sick, I said evenly. I went to take care of her. She died last year. The words landed in that hushed hall with a weight even Renata couldn't talk over. Julian nodded slowly, something shifting in his expression from professional curiosity into something closer to respect. Beside him, my sister had gone a specific shade of gray, the color a story turns when it collapses in one sentence, in front of the exact person she'd most needed it to hold up for. She had a real chance to recover gracefully in that moment. She could have said, "I'm so proud of my sister. Look what she stepped away from." Instead, she laughed nervously and said, "Well, that was ages ago, Julian. She's not really in the industry anymore. Been out for years. You know how the field moves on." Said reflexively, the way you'd swat at a wasp, except she said it to her own CEO. About a woman he just called the backbone of his entire firm, having introduced that same woman as an unemployed freeloader minutes earlier. Julian turned his head slowly and looked at my sister. Really looked at her, the way you reread a document and finally catch what you missed the first time. The warmth drained out of his face, replaced not with anger but with something colder and more final. "Renata," he said quietly, quiet enough that people leaned in without meaning to. "I've heard the way you talk about people at the office. I told myself it was ambition. Sharp elbows. I gave you room." He paused. "But I just watched you introduce your own sister, a woman this firm owes a genuine debt to, as an unemployed loser, at her son's wedding to impress me. That tells me everything I needed to know and didn't want to." He raised a hand before she could speak. "This isn't the place, and I won't make it one. HR will be in touch Monday. I think you already know why." Renata made a sound I'd never heard from her. Small, airless. And here's what surprised even me. I didn't feel the surge of vindication I'd have expected. Watching my sister's face fall apart in front of Priya's family and my own son, what moved through me was heavier and stranger, because one quiet sentence had just unmade a woman who thought a title made her untouchable. And I realized I didn't actually want her unmade. I wanted something else. I just hadn't found the words for it yet. I found my son first, told him none of this was his to carry, and that this was, in fact, the night his mother finally got herself back. Priya hugged me without a word. Then I walked over to Julian and asked for a moment near the vine-wrapped post at the edge of the tent. "What you built," he started. "I owe you." "Don't fire my sister because of me," I said, cutting in gently. He tilted his head. "If she's crossed a line your firm draws, that's your call to make. But I won't start my next chapter by having a woman destroyed on my behalf. That's not a win I want my name on." He studied me for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket, pulled out one of his own cards, heavy stock, his name in clean type, and set it on the little cocktail table between us. "You're exactly the person I spent 3 years looking for," he said. "Northbridge would take you back at the top. Head of strategy for the whole firm. I'll personally make sure the announcement corrects the record. The whole industry will know Diane Ashworth is back." He named a number large enough that the eavesdropping great-aunt actually gasped from 10 feet away. I want to be honest, I considered it. Everything in me that had gone hungry for 3 years leaned toward that card. "Take the title," that voice said. "Take the salary. Walk back into the industry that watched you disappear, and let them watch you return in triumph. Let Renata read about it in a trade newsletter." But wanting a thing and needing it are two very different ledgers, and my mother taught me how to read a balance sheet. If I took that card, I'd be handed my worth again from the outside, granted by a powerful man, printed on stock I didn't choose. I'd be real again exactly the way Renata measures real. I'd win her game. And a person who wins someone else's game has still agreed to play by their rules. My mother's voice again, clear as that last good week. "Don't you dare measure yourself the same way." I finally understood completely what she'd been trying to hand me. I'd spent my whole life believing my worth was whatever I produced for other people. Close the deal, run the room, and you're worth the applause. Stop producing, and you're between things. That was Renata's arithmetic, too. The same arithmetic that made her refuse to care for our mother. The same one that nearly convinced me, alone on my apartment floor with an old photograph, that a woman without a title is a woman without value. But I'd just spent the most valuable 2 years of my life in a room with no applause at all, no credit, no resume line, no witnesses. It hadn't been a gap. It had been the truest work I've ever done, and the world had simply gotten the accounting wrong. I picked Julian's card up, held it long enough that he'd understand exactly what I was declining, and slid it gently back across the table. "Thank you," I said. "You have no idea what it means that you remembered me, but I'm not taking the seat. I didn't get lost out there. This room just forgot how to see. That was never mine to fix by taking a better chair. I don't need to be restored. I need to build my own table where the first question isn't, 'What's your title?' but, 'Who did you take care of?'" He laughed softly, put the card away, and shook my hand. In 30 years, you're the first person I've offered that chair to who'd rather build her own room. Consider me your first client. That was a little over a year ago. I built that table. Ashworth's strategy is small on purpose, 3 people and a short, deliberate list of clients. Julian became the first of them, which opened doors I never had to knock on twice. It's not an empire, and I don't want one. I've already lived the version of my life that chases the biggest possible room, and I'm not chasing it again. This firm is enough, and it measures the right things. Renata left Northbridge that Monday. The industry is small, and word travels. She eventually landed at a smaller firm in another city, a rung lower, still clutching. We aren't close, and I've stopped pretending we will be. Some fractures don't heal into something stronger. They just heal enough to stop bleeding, and you learn to carry the scar and the distance both. The world's arithmetic never changed. It still worships the title and files the caregiving years under gap. I've stopped trying to fix that. But Caleb and Priya come for dinner most weeks now, and Priya's expecting, and my son hugs me like a man who finally knows exactly what his mother is worth. Last month, I interviewed a candidate for our firm who'd spent 3 years off the ladder caring for her father. Her hands shook when she reached the blank stretch on her resume, bracing for the question everyone always asks. I didn't ask about the gap. I asked her to tell me about her dad. She cried, and then she talked, and I knew I was hiring her before she finished the sentence. A card offered and declined. A quiet man setting down his glass. A sister who finally said the true thing out loud. Too late to matter. If there's a quiet woman in your life carrying more than the room around her can see, tell her today. Don't wait for a wedding to find out what she's worth. Subscribe to Quiet Table Stories, and I'll see you in the next one.